Welcome back to the Plays with Cars YouTube channel. Today we are reviewing the C5 generation Corvette Z06, and to let you know whether or not this really is one of the best performance bargains you can buy right now as an enthusiast.
That's going up on YouTube tonight.
This is a C5 generation Corvette Z06, and today we're gonna review it. So a great many channels have already done reviews of the C5 Z06. Doug has covered them. I believe Regular Cars might have. There's a bunch out there. I know Matt Farah has. None of them have really owned one though. This is my personal C5 Z06. I've had it for about 7 months now, and I have competed with it, and I can tell you it really is an awesome performance bargain, but there's some things you need to know. Alright, so first the basics. The C5 Corvette generation came out in 1997, and it was very, very different than the C4 that preceded it. Suddenly this car got a lot more modern. It was the first car with the LS motor, obviously the greatest engine swap motor of all time, and 6-speed manuals that were located in the back, a transaxle, as opposed to in the middle, a transmission for better weight distribution, way better handling, more advanced braking, more advanced suspension. Everything about it was a massive, massive upgrade. They launched with, I believe, 340 horsepower, somewhere around there, but the Z06 came out in 2001. And the Z06 originally had 385 horsepower from its LS6, still a 5.7 liter LS motor, all aluminum. And a year later in 02, which is what year this one is, that increased to 405 horsepower, which stayed like that through the end of the run in 04. Now, the body style, all Z06s are a hardtop coupe. You can see the body line here goes with a very quickly sloping rear window as opposed to the long sweeping rear window of the regular C5s. Those C5s are hatchbacks. This car is a coupe. It has a trunk lid that comes up and the window stays put. Also, the hatchback cars had a targa roof, so this band right here was solid, and then the front part of the roof here could come off and you could get them in clear and smoked and body color, which is pretty cool. But you couldn't get the hatchback style as the Z06, and you couldn't get anything besides the Z06 except for a very special run of cars called the FRC, the fixed roof coupe, in this body style. Those were, I believe, 99 and 2000 only. I'll have to look at that. But anyways, the fixed roof coupe came out. It had all the standard C5 stuff. It was just this body. They didn't make very many of them. They stopped making the FRC and then came out with the Z06. Now, only the Z06 has these factory brake ducts. These are real and functional. Air goes in here, goes through brake ductwork that you can see in there, and to the rear calipers in order to cool the rear brakes on track. Same thing here with the front. These front ducts here have actual functional ductwork in them that goes into the calipers here on the front to cool the fronts down. So the whole caliper, even though it's a dual piston, it slides, it pivots on those pivot pins instead of being a fixed caliper. So brake fade is definitely a thing, especially in the front. So if you're going to track day the car, definitely think about upgrading to fixed caliper front brakes. Same thing with the rear, just a single piston slider. So again, you probably want to think about upgrading those for track work. For autocross work, they're pretty much just fine as far as stock goes. So the C5 Corvette brought an all-new suspension and chassis setup to the Corvette lineup. The big changes obviously being moving the transmission to the very rear of the car, becoming a transaxle, and also this all-new suspension setup. This suspension uses transverse leaf springs. Now, that doesn't mean the old-school longitudinal leaf springs like you'd find in the back of pickup trucks. It means this right here, this composite spring that spans the width of the car from wheel to wheel. This is the only spring. You look up here, there's no coil spring around the shock. There's no spring on the control arm at all. This is the only thing with spring tension for the whole suspension. And these come in different rates, and the ones in the Z06 are beefier with a higher rate than the ones in the standard C5s. Now, that being said, there's not a lot of performance potential in these. Not because it's not necessarily a good design, but because this just isn't where the aftermarket is. The aftermarket is all in on coilover setups. So the big thing to do with these is to literally buy a coilover setup. So you would take these springs out entirely, and you would replace these shocks with coilovers, Viking being one of the big ones, in order to convert these cars over to a modern coilover. And then you can change your spring rates like to infinity, because there's everything under the sun is available for standard coilovers. Okay, so performance stats. Your 02 to 04 Z06, 405 horsepower, like I said, 6-speed manual transmissions in all of them. You could not get a Z06 with an automatic. Quarter mile in about 12.4. About 112, 113, 115, depending miles an hour on your DA and whatnot. But basically, you're looking at a low to mid 12-second car out of the box on factory tires and everything, just exactly how you see it. Hopefully, the engine is a 405 horsepower LS6, so that's a 5.7 liter all aluminum, that means block and heads, LS based small block engine. So first year LS6s were only 385 horsepower. There was a cam change, an ECU tune, and a couple other little differences to get it to the 405 that the 02 to 04s do. The big issue you need to worry about though is valve springs. You can see our particular example has the original yellow valve springs. These have issues where they can crack, fail, and even break. And so if you're going to do any kind of work with the car at all, you really should replace those right away. So if we were keeping this thing, the first thing we would do is actually change all of those valve springs out. So we got to talk about this thing. What you are looking at is the harmonic balancer on the engine, on the very front of the crankshaft. These all have delamination issues. If you look real close, you can see the outside edge, which has the holes drilled in it. There's a rubber piece that separates that from the inside edge. That rubber degrades over time, and the whole pulley starts to wobble and eventually fail. Replacing this pulley with an aftermarket one-piece setup is almost mandatory in these for any kind of track work. Other than that, there's not a lot of issues with the engines in these. They're fairly reliable. They're obviously super easy to work on. Parts are readily available everywhere. The sky is the limit when it comes to horsepower. One issue you do run into is the clutch. Now again, on C5 Corvettes, the transmission is not here in the middle. It's there in the back. So you have a clutch up here, what's called a torque tube in the middle. It's like a drive shaft, but it's got a housing around it so that there's nothing actually spinning that you can physically see. And then the transaxle in the back. The problem with this comes from the hydraulic clutch unit. It's not designed for fast shifting. It's got a restrictor in it. And clutch master and clutch slave issues are very common in these. Tick Performance makes the solution here. It's a bit involved, but if you're going to race the car at all, if you're going to track it, if you're going to drag race it, you absolutely need to get that done. Okay, now the big but. All of this is true, and the car is a fantastic performance bargain, and today, 2021, it's still a fantastic performance bargain. The issue is these cars are aging, and they are aging in ways that are unexpected for the performance enthusiast. Let me show you what I'm going on about. Here we are on TireRack.com. Okay, this is, probably the biggest and most trusted online tire shopping place. We're going to go shop for tires. Alright, we're going to put in our 2002 Chevrolet Corvette Z06. Okay, nothing special, nothing crazy. Factory sizes, 265, 40, 17 front, 295, 35, 18 rear. Yeah, that just happened. Literally no tires available. We're not talking, low production or, a couple of sets to choose from, but they're expensive. Like, literally, there is nothing. If I want to buy tires for my car, there is literally nothing. And it's not just Tire Rack. Here's Discount Tire Direct. Let's do the same thing. Scroll down here, 2002 Chevrolet Corvette. Tell them it's a Z06. Those are the stock ones. Give me some tires. What do you got? Fine tires. Give me everything. Come on. One set available of Goodyear Eagle F1 supercars. One. For $1,520. And these cars run a staggered wheel setup. What do I mean by that? The front wheel here isn't just narrower, it's also a different rim diameter. It is a 17-inch front rim. So you run a 265/40/17 on the front stock. The back wheel is not just wider, it's also a different diameter. It's an 18, and you run a 295/35/18 on the back. Obviously, this is where the tire issue comes from. Any tire that's made big enough to fit here on the back, that comes in a 295/18, they aren't likely to come with the 17s to go with it. And this is where you run into the tire issues. Now, there is a simple, quote-unquote, fix for this, and that's to get another set of Z06 wheels and put a set of rears on the front. And now you have a square setup. You're running the rear wheels all the way around, the 18s. The problem being, Z06 wheels have gotten ridiculously hard to find. But now we have to talk about the downsides of this car. The big one being the GM-ness of it. And for those of you who don't know what I mean, I am car agnostic, okay? I love all the cars from all the manufacturers. GM is just not that great when it comes to things like this. They make fantastic drivetrains, but they really miss the mark on a lot of details. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. So for example, the Z06 has the fixed roof coupe body, right? It's not the hatchback like the base Corvette. It's got this fixed hardtop, which means it has a trunk, all right? You're like, well, what's wrong with that? I've got my little key popper thingy here. I hit trunk, and that's as far as it opened. Did you catch it? Did you even see it? And look, you literally can't get your finger under there. What you have to do is open the door and shut it in order to build up enough air pressure inside the Corvette to get your finger under to pop the trunk. So every time you want to put something in the trunk, you've got to go through that ridiculousness in order to get into the trunk. Because, and it's not, these aren't bad, these are great. This car is super low miles, everything works like it's supposed to. Every single Z06 I've ever seen has done this. Alright, are you watching? Because I want you to catch it. Ready? Did you see? That's it. That's all you get. And the door pop. Ready? So another major annoyance is here inside. You've got this center console area here with this nice padded armrest with storage underneath it, right? Well, when you're sitting parked and you need to get something out of it, you hit the little locking button, which isn't, I mean, having the lock is nice, but you go to open it, and you pull this open, and it doesn't open. You have to like kind of swing at it, and it still doesn't open because the parking brake is on. It will not open with the parking brake on. You literally have to put the parking brake down in order to swing this thing up all the way. You know, it's got this neat little hinge on it to help get it up when you've got, you know, this stuff, but this is just ridiculous. So again, parking brake up, can't open it. So another annoying thing has actually been fixed in this car. This divider here, this trunk divider, is an aftermarket add-on piece. That is not factory. From the factory, this is just open all the way to the trunk, which means whenever you hit the brakes, anything you have in the trunk comes flying forward and either smacks the seat, smacks this lip, or comes into the driver's compartment because there's nothing dividing the trunk from inside the car. Now, I get that they wanted to make it practical and also, production things with having all this inside stuff be the same, but would it really be that hard for GM to include something like this on a Z06? Another one that is really, really notorious in C5s and C5 Z06s, especially if you do any kind of track work, is this. Did you catch that? There is no lock on the seat for going forward. So which means if you're on an autocross course or a track day, every time you hit the brakes, this seat goes, and then you hit the gas and it goes, and then you hit the brakes and it goes, and then you hit the gas and it goes. This is why people replace the seats in these right away if they do any kind of track work. So obviously, if we're talking about track work, we have to mention skip shift. For those of you that are unfamiliar, skip shift is an electronic lockout built onto the transmission and shifter, where if you're just puttering around town and you go to shift, it will lock out second gear and force you to shift into fourth gear, like that, instead of into second gear. Now, most of the time you can get around this by just revving the engine high enough that it never engages. But when it does engage, it's super annoying because you're kind of puttering, you go to shift, it doesn't want to go in, you're like, what the heck's going on? It finally gets you into fourth and you're like, oh geez, like now I'm lugging the car along like crazy. So it's called a skip shift, and a skip shift eliminator is like one of the first things you do to these cars, any GM really, that has this feature. It is really, really annoying, and it's some sort of gas mileage thing, but I've found in reality that it makes it worse because you end up lugging the engine in fourth gear, which eats way more fuel than just going through the gears normally at a normal RPM rate. It's just not a very bright idea, and GM is the only one that insists on doing it. Another big problem with C5s in general is the steering wheel interlock. And what that means is when you put the key in the ignition here, the lock that locks the steering wheel in place, when you turn the ignition in order to unlock the steering wheel, you see ours unlocked right away, that can hang up and doesn't work, and then you end up having big issues, and you have to replace a bunch of stuff inside the steering column here in order to keep that from happening. It's something that shouldn't break, and it does break on these a lot, and it's just super annoying. All right, one more thing I got to touch on that, again, has to do specifically with the fixed roof coupe body style, is this seal here on the rear window. Now, this car has legit been garaged its entire life. This seal is perfect and like new. There's no water leaks in the car. However, water still gets underneath this seal and pools down here, right here. And so when you wash the car and dry the car, you get constant water coming out of this spot just continuously. And so you have to dry it and dry it and dry it and dry it, or you end up with a water spot right here. And eventually it starts taking away the clear coat from all the wear from the water being there. Again, every single fixed roof coupe I've ever seen does this. It's just not a good design. It's a flimsy, cheap seal that doesn't seal very well on, kind of a fiberglass car that, is a little bit flexible. It's just not a good idea. So, driving the C5 Z06 Corvette. It drives pretty well, actually. That is one thing that this car has going for it. It's one thing that the GM-ness comes through in a positive light. It is definitely a daily drivable car. It's easy to drive, easy to steer, easy to shift. Great sight lines all the way around. Oh my gosh, you got these thin little A pillars. The B pillars are really kind of placed well for you to be able to see and not have them block out. The back window is nice and big. The defroster works great. The HVAC works great. The radio is an early 2000s radio, not anything to be enthusiastic about there, but it's a regular old radio and it's not all integrated with everything, so it's super easy to make it as crazy as you want, which is nice. Seats are comfortable-ish enough. Materials quality is kind of hit and miss. It's late 90s, early 2000s GM. It just really isn't all that quality in here. So one of the big differences between this and your regular run-of-the-mill C5, the hatchback has a target top. This piece right here actually comes off and that can be a really nice, fun experience if you're looking for just a fun car as opposed to a track car. The Targa is really nice, and the hatchback is a little bit more useful of a body shape when it comes to the C5 generation. So, you know, if you're not looking for the ultimate track car, if you're looking more for like a fun car, the regular C5 is probably your better bet. You're not, the extra money you spend on a Z06 isn't going to get you anything that you want. So, super duper annoyance. Traction controller, active handling, as Jane puts it. It's always on when you start the car. When you start it, if you want to turn it off, you have to hit this button. Granted, one button and it's all off and you're done. Except for now in the gauge cluster, it says traction handling off. And that's the only thing it says. It will not ever show you any other information. So all of the great info that you could get through the gauge cluster, your oil pressure and whatnot, you can't see any of it. Not even the mileage. It's ridiculous. Power in the world is Z06. Problem is, everybody sees you're in a Z06 and they don't want to let you pass. Alright, here's the big thing we need to talk about though, is whether or not you should buy this car from an enthusiast standpoint. I'm going to go with a big fat it depends on this one. If you are looking for a track car, you want to go autocross, track day, time attack, drag racing, you want performance for your dollar, it's hard to say no to the Z06. It really is. I would buy a Z06 that's already somebody's track car. Something that somebody else put all the money into so I didn't have to. That's what I would do. If you are looking for a fun car that's a street car that you can take to the track when you want to and kind of occasionally do a test and tune night at the drag strip or do one track night in America or something like that, it's good for that. If you care about interior quality at all, you should really consider a GTO instead. I hate to say it, but I'm going to say it. The Australian-made 04 to 06 GTO is a completely different ball game than the C5 Corvette when it comes to interior quality. It's not even on the same planet. Now, when it comes to hauling the mail, though, the Z06 does sound ridiculously good and make really usable power. However, so does the GTO. So does a regular C5. Is it worth the extra? I'm not sure it is. About the only thing that makes sense for buying a C5 Z06 is if you are looking at an appreciating asset. If you want to buy a car that you could occasionally take out for some fun and just kind of own for the next 10 years and then sell for a lot more money than you paid for it, I think buying a Cherry Z06 might be the way to go. These things have increased 42% in value just in the last 6 months. These cars are increasing in values that far outstrip the rest of the market. When it comes to V8 stick shift sports cars, there's not a lot of offerings out there. And this really is one of the best of the breed. When it comes to a collector standpoint, the things like the low production numbers, the thinner glass, the less soundproofing, the unique body style, those things matter. They make a difference. So in 20, 30, 50 years, when people are discussing collector cars, Z06s are going to be collector quality. They're going to be collector grade. This is the car people are going to pay big money for, not a standard C5. So if you're looking for somewhere to park your money for the next couple of decades, I don't think you can go wrong with the Z06. I think it's a smart buy even in today's market where they're already shooting up in value. It's tough though, because you can't really drive the car, you can't really enjoy the car, you're just sitting on it. All that being said, I've really enjoyed owning this car. I've owned this car for about 8 months now. I've personally drag raced it, taken it on nice drives through nice twisty roads, and really experienced the ownership of it, of really what was one of my dream cars, which was one of my bucket list cars. It's just this particular car and what I'm looking for right now don't quite line up. I'm not looking for somewhere to park my money for the next 20 or 30 years. And this car is not already track ready. And I would frankly kill the value of this one in order to make it track ready. The smart thing for me to do if I wanted to track this car would be to sell it, buy a track ready one already, and end up with a bunch of money in my pocket and not end up ruining this car. So yeah, by the time this video releases, this car will be sold. Part of all of this filming was doing my film work for putting this car on Bring a Trailer. I've decided that this particular car doesn't fit my particular needs and sold it on Bring a Trailer.